I wake up drowning in silk that costs more than my entire year's rent. And the first thing I notice isn't the impossible thread count or the way morning light filters through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook a city I thought I knew, but rather the blood, dried and dark beneath my fingernails, crusted in the creases of my knuckles, painting half-moons of crimson evidence that something terrible has happened, though my mind feels like shattered glass, and I can't quite piece together all the fragments of last night into something coherent. The diamond necklace resting against my collarbone feels like a noose made of starlight, heavy and cold and utterly foreign. Because yesterday I was Aria Moretti, who wore costume jewelry from street vendors and convinced herself that cubic zirconia held its own kind of beauty. And today I'm apparently someone who wears stones that could feed a family for months. And the dissonance between these two versions of myself makes my stomach turn in ways that have nothing to do with the throbbing ache that radiates from my ribs with every shallow breath I take. My body catalogs the damage before my mind can catch up. There's a sharp, stabbing pain along my left side that suggests cracked ribs, a dull throb at the base of my skull that pulses in time with my heartbeat. And when I finally force myself to move, to sit up in this bed that feels like a cloud made of sins and secrets, I discover bruises blooming across my skin, like violent watercolors in shades of purple and black and sickly yellow-green, each one a testament to hands that wanted to hurt me, to break me, to make me disappear into the kind of silence that comes from 6 feet of dirt and a grave with no name. That's when I see him, and my heart, already racing, already trying to break free from the cage of my battered ribs, stops completely, because the man standing at the foot of this enormous bed is the kind of beautiful that mythology warns you about. The kind that makes sailors crash their ships on rocks and makes smart women do catastrophically stupid things, all 6'4" of lethal grace poured into a 3-piece suit that probably costs more than my art history degree. And everything about him screams danger in a language my body understands even if my traumatized mind is still struggling to translate. His hair is dark as a moonless night, styled with the kind of careless perfection that suggests it cost a fortune to look that effortlessly disheveled, and his eyes, God. His eyes are the color of espresso, so dark they're nearly black, holding depths that promise both salvation and damnation depending on which side of his mercy you find yourself standing on. And right now, those eyes are fixed on me with an intensity that makes me feel simultaneously protected and completely exposed, like he can see through all my carefully constructed walls, straight down to the terrified, traumatized core of who I really am. "You're awake," he says, and his voice is exactly what I imagine death would sound like if death wore expensive cologne and knew how to make a woman's pulse race for all the wrong reasons. Smooth and deep, and wrapped in an accent that speaks of old money and older violence, the kind of voice that could order someone's execution over morning espresso and then discuss the weather without missing a beat. I want to speak, want to demand where I am and who he is and what the hell happened to me. But my throat feels like I've swallowed broken glass mixed with desert sand. And when I try to form words, all that emerges is a pathetic, rasping sound that makes his expression shift into something that might be concern if men like him were capable of such pedestrian emotions. He moves with the fluid grace of a predator, crossing the distance between us in 3 long strides that eat up the space of this bedroom that's larger than my entire apartment. And before I can even think about being afraid, though fear is definitely lurking somewhere beneath the confusion and pain and bone-deep exhaustion, he's pressing a glass of water into my trembling hands, his fingers brushing against mine in a touch that sends electricity racing up my arm, despite every logical reason why I should recoil from this stranger who has me in his domain. "Drink slowly," he instructs, and there's something in his tone that suggests he's used to being obeyed, that commands fall from his lips like natural law, and the universe bends to accommodate his will. So I drink because my body craves the water more than my pride craves rebellion. And the cool liquid sliding down my ravaged throat feels like the first good thing that's happened to me in what might be hours or might be days. Time has become a slippery, unreliable thing in the wake of whatever trauma has landed me here. Who are you? I finally managed to croak out, my voice sounding nothing like the confident, capable woman I was 24 hours ago, sounding instead like something broken and barely holding together. And I hate the weakness in those 3 words almost as much as I hate the way my hands are shaking so badly that water sloshes over the rim of the glass. Dante Salvatore, he says, as if that name should mean something to me, as if those syllables should make me understand everything. And maybe they would if I existed in the world he clearly inhabits. But I'm just Aria Moretti, a nobody with a worthless art history degree working as a glorified secretary at a gallery that launders more money than it sells paintings. And men like him exist in a stratosphere so far above my pay grade that we might as well be different species. But then something clicks in my fragmenting memory, because even I, sheltered and naive and so stupidly blind to what was happening right under my nose, have heard whispers of that name, have overheard conversations that died the moment I entered a room, have seen the way certain men would go pale and quiet when that surname was mentioned in hushed tones that carried the weight of reverence and terror in equal measure. Dante Salvatore, the king of the city's underworld, the man who controls everything from the docks to the diamond district, whose word is law in places where actual law fears to tread, and whose reputation for cold, calculated violence is matched only by his reputation for protecting what belongs to him with a ferocity that makes examples of anyone foolish enough to test his boundaries. And somehow, impossibly, I'm in his bed, wearing his diamonds, painted in blood that my scrambling memory insists isn't mine, and the only question echoing through my concussed brain is how a nobody like me ended up in the crosshairs of a man who could destroy my entire existence with a phone call. I know what you're thinking, he continues, settling himself into a leather chair positioned beside the bed, like he's been keeping vigil, like he's been watching me sleep and waiting for me to wake. And that thought should terrify me, but instead sends a confusing warmth spreading through my chest that I absolutely do not want to examine too closely. You're wondering how you got here, why you're alive, what happens next, and whether you're in more danger now than you were before. He's right, of course, because all those questions and 1,000 more are screaming through my mind like a chorus of panic. But I force myself to meet his eyes despite every instinct telling me to look away, to make myself small and unthreatening, because something in my battered soul refuses to be diminished any further, refuses to give this man or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me cower. The blood, I whisper, looking down at my hands that tell a story I can't quite remember. And when I glance back up at him, his expression has shifted into something darker, something that promises retribution in a language written in violence and vengeance. Isn't yours, he confirms, and there's satisfaction in his voice that suggests he knows exactly whose blood decorates my skin like war paint, knows and is pleased by this fact, in ways that should horrify me, but instead spark something fierce and feral in the pit of my stomach. And then the memories come flooding back in a wave of sensory overload that nearly drowns me. The gallery opening last night, champagne and canapes and wealthy patrons discussing pieces they'd never appreciate beyond their investment potential. My boss Marcus Stone taking a call that made his face go ashen, the way he'd grabbed my arm with fingers that dug bruises into my flesh and hissed that I needed to leave immediately, to go home and forget everything I'd seen and heard over the past 6 months. But I hadn't left fast enough, had lingered to grab my coat from the back office, and that's when they'd arrived. 3 men in expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the violence in their shoulders and their eyes. Men who moved through the gallery like they owned it, like they owned everything. And when Marcus had tried to stand between them and the safe where he kept the real books, the ones that documented every illegal transaction and money laundering scheme, they'd beaten him with a casual brutality that suggested this was just another Tuesday for them. I'd watched from my hiding spot behind a sculpture worth more than my life, watched as they'd made him kneel, watched as the leader, a man with cold blue eyes and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, had put a gun to Marcus's head and pulled the trigger without even a flicker of emotion crossing his face. And the sound of that gunshot still echoes in my skull like a bell that won't stop ringing, announcing the death of my innocence and my ignorance in one deafening report. They'd found me, of course, because men like that always find what they're looking for. And they'd dragged me from my hiding spot with hands that left bruises and threats that promised worse. Had thrown me into the back of a car that smelled like leather and cigarettes and fear. Had taken me to an alley where the streetlights had been conveniently shot out and the shadows held teeth. The beating had been methodical, professional, designed to hurt without killing, to send a message to anyone else who might have witnessed what I'd witnessed, and I'd curled into myself and tried to protect my vital organs while fists and boots rained down on me like judgment, like punishment for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'd thought, this is how I die. Alone in the dark, with no one to mourn me except maybe my little sister Emma, who I'd been trying so hard to protect from the reality of how brutal this city could be. But then they'd stopped, had left me bleeding and broken on the filthy concrete, and the last thing I'd heard before consciousness had slipped away like water through my fingers was the leader saying, "Let her rot here as a warning. Dead girls tell no tales." Except I hadn't died, obviously, because here I am in Dante Salvatore's bed, trying to reconcile the woman who'd been left for garbage with the woman wearing diamonds that catch the morning light and throw rainbows across cream-colored walls. "Who did this to you?" Dante asks, and his voice has dropped into a register that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, makes every primitive part of my brain scream danger while simultaneously whispering safety. And when I look at him, I see something burning in those dark eyes that looks like rage barely leashed, like violence waiting for a target, like divine retribution dressed in Italian wool. And I realize in that moment, with a clarity that cuts through the pain and the fear and the confusion, that answering this question will change everything. That giving him the names of the men who beat me and killed Marcus will set something in motion that I won't be able to stop. That I'll be making a deal with a devil who might be more dangerous than the monsters I'm running from. But when I open my mouth, when I look into the eyes of this beautiful, terrifying man who found me dying in an alley and brought me to his sanctuary instead of leaving me to my fate, the words spill out like a confession, like a prayer, like a declaration of war. "The Constantine family," I tell him, my voice gaining strength with each syllable, with each name I give him, with each detail I remember about the men who thought they could break me and walk away clean. "Victor Constantine and his men, they killed my boss Marcus Stone at the Artemis Gallery, and when they found me hiding, when they realized I'd witnessed everything, they beat me and dumped me like trash because they thought I was nobody, thought I didn't matter, thought I'd die before anyone found me." Something changes in Dante's expression, something dark and satisfied and absolutely merciless. And he leans forward in his chair until I can smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that reminds me of cedar and smoke and promises kept in blood. "The Constantines," he repeats, and the way he says that name makes it sound like a death sentence, like he's already planning exactly how he'll dismantle their empire piece by piece until nothing remains but ruins and regret. I've been looking for an excuse to destroy Victor Constantine for 3 years, ever since he made the mistake of thinking he could operate in my city without consequences. And you, Aria Moretti, have just given me exactly what I need. He knows my name, and I don't remember telling him, which means he's looked into me, has probably learned everything there is to know about my unremarkable life in the hours while I was unconscious. And that should frighten me, but instead makes me feel seen in a way I've never experienced before. "I want to offer you something," Dante continues, his eyes never leaving mine, holding me captive with nothing more than the intensity of his gaze and the weight of whatever proposition is about to fall from his lips. "A mutually beneficial arrangement that will give you everything you need and give me the key to bringing down the Constantines in a way that will make every criminal in this city remember why they fear the Salvatore name." My heart is hammering so hard, I'm sure he can hear it. Can probably see my pulse jumping in my throat. And I know without him saying another word that whatever he's about to offer me will be the kind of choice that defines the rest of my life. The kind of crossroads moment where one path leads back to safety and obscurity, and the other leads into darkness and danger and the unknown. What kind of arrangement? I manage to ask, even though part of me already knows, already understands that men like Dante Salvatore don't do anything without calculating every angle, without ensuring that every move serves multiple purposes. He smiles, and it's the kind of smile that probably makes his enemy's blood run cold, the kind that promises retribution wrapped in charm, and when he speaks, his voice carries the weight of absolute certainty, like he already knows I'm going to say yes because, really, what choice do I have? Become mine, he says simply, as if those two words don't contain multitudes, don't represent a complete transformation of everything I am and everything I thought I'd be. Publicly, you'll be my companion, my lover, the woman on my arm at events where the city's elite gather to pretend they're civilized while they scheme and plot and destroy each other's empires. You'll be visible, untouchable, protected by my name and my reputation in ways that will make the Constantines think twice about finishing what they started. He pauses, letting that sink in, letting me imagine what it would mean to walk through the world as Dante Salvatore's woman. And the thought is both terrifying and intoxicating in ways I don't want to admit. And privately, he continues, his voice dropping into something more intimate, more dangerous. You'll be my eyes and ears in the art world where these families launder their blood money, where you already have access and knowledge that most people overlook because they think a gallery assistant is too insignificant to notice the patterns, too powerless to be a threat. You'll help me map their operations, identify their weaknesses, and when the time comes, you'll help me burn their empire to the ground and salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again. It's insane, accepting such an offer from a man I've known for all of 15 minutes, a man whose reputation is built on violence and power, and a ruthlessness that makes other criminals look like choir boys. But then again, my alternative is to go back to my ransacked apartment, because of course they would have searched my home, would have made sure I had nothing that could hurt them, and wait for the Constantines to realize I survived and come back to finish the job properly. And if I say no? I ask, even though we both know I won't, even though the word yes is already forming on my tongue like it's been waiting there all along. Then I'll have my men take you to a safe house outside the city, set you up with a new identity, and you can spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder and wondering when Victor Constantine's reach will finally find you, Dante says with brutal honesty that I almost appreciate. Or you can stay here with me, and we can make them all regret the day they decided you were disposable. The choice, when he frames it like that, isn't really a choice at all, and maybe that's what he was counting on. Maybe that's why he orchestrated this entire conversation to lead me exactly here, to this moment where saying yes feels like the only logical option, even though logic has absolutely nothing to do with the fire burning in my chest at the thought of making the men who hurt me pay for every bruise, every broken rib, every moment of terror they inflicted. I have 24 hours to decide, I say, because I need time to process this, need space to think without those dark eyes watching my every reaction, and to my surprise, he nods. 24 hours, he agrees, standing with that predatory grace that makes every movement look like a calculated threat. My driver will take you wherever you need to go, and you'll have protection watching you every moment, because the Constantines may already know you survived, and if they see you moving around the city without protection, they'll strike before you can make your decision. He moves toward the door, then pauses, looking back at me with an expression I can't quite read. Something that might be respect, or might be calculation, or might be some combination of the two. For what it's worth, Arya, I'm sorry for what they did to you, he says, and the sincerity in his voice catches me off guard. Makes me believe that maybe beneath all the violence and the power plays, there's something human still living in Dante Salvatore. No one deserves to be thrown away like garbage, and the fact that you're still breathing, still fighting, still strong enough to look me in the eye and negotiate after everything you've been through tells me you're exactly the kind of woman who could survive in my world. And then he's gone, leaving me alone in this bedroom that feels like a golden cage, and I force myself out of bed despite the way my body screams in protest. make my way to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offer a view of the city spread out below, like a glittering promise of everything I've never had and everything I might lose. I catch my reflection in the glass, bruised, battered, wearing a dead man's blood and a crime lord's diamonds, and I barely recognize the woman staring back at me, because somewhere between being left for dead and waking up in Dante Salvatore's bed, something fundamental has shifted inside me. Something that whispers I don't have to be a victim anymore, that I could be something else entirely if I'm brave enough to reach out and take it. 24 hours to decide between safety and vengeance, between obscurity and power, between the woman I was and the woman I could become. And as I stand there watching the sun rise over a city that tried to break me, I realize with crystalline clarity that my decision was made the moment Victor Constantine's boot connected with my ribs, the moment they left me bleeding in that alley, the moment Dante Salvatore asked me who did this, and looked at me like I was worth saving. I touch the diamonds at my throat, feel the weight of them like a promise or a threat, and I know with absolute certainty that when those 24 hours are up, I'm going to walk back into this penthouse and tell Dante Salvatore yes, and together we're going to make every man who thought I was disposable learn the hardest lesson of their miserable lives. That sometimes the women you try to bury come back as something far more dangerous than you ever imagined, and by the time dawn breaks on whatever comes next, they're all going to regret the day they underestimated Aria Moretti. The 24 hours Dante gave me to make my decision evaporate like morning mist under a merciless sun, and I spend most of that time in a tiny cafe 3 blocks from my apartment, nursing cup after cup of coffee that tastes like burnt regret while I watch the door with the kind of paranoia that comes from knowing someone wants you dead and has already proven they're willing to follow through on that desire. My apartment, when I finally work up the courage to return to it, escorted by one of Dante's silent, intimidating guards, who introduces himself only as Marco and treats me with the kind of distant professionalism that suggests he's babysat plenty of his boss's projects before. Looks like a hurricane made of malice, and thorough investigation has torn through every room, with drawers pulled out and emptied across the floor, cushions sliced open to spill their stuffing, like the guts of small animals, and my few precious possessions scattered and broken in ways that feel personal. Like whoever searched this place wanted to make sure I understood that nowhere is safe, that they can reach me anywhere, that my entire life is nothing more than paper they can crumple and discard whenever they choose. But it's the note that really drives the message home. The single piece of paper laid carefully on my ransacked bed, like a love letter from death itself, with words written in blocky, masculine handwriting that promise things far worse than the beating I already endured. Dead girls tell no tales, but we're willing to make sure you understand exactly how dead you should have stayed before we finish the job properly. Marco reads the note over my shoulder with an expression that suggests he's seen this kind of threat 1,000 times before, has probably delivered similar messages himself in service to Dante's empire. And when he looks at me with those cold, assessing eyes that remind me of winter storms, I see the exact moment he decides I'm not going to run, not going to collapse, not going to be the hysterical, terrified victim the Constantines expect me to be. The boss said you have until sunset to decide, Marco says in a voice that carries the faint trace of an accent I can't quite place, something Eastern European mixed with years of living in America. And there's no judgment in his tone when he adds, "But if you're smart," which I think you are despite the fact that you worked in a gallery owned by a man laundering money for 3 different crime families without apparently noticing, you'll call him right now and tell him you're ready to accept his offer, because that note means they know you survived, and they're planning something that will make your beating look like a friendly warning. He's right, of course. And the last fragile threads of my hesitation, the part of me that still believed I could maybe run, could maybe disappear into some other city and build some other life where men like Victor Constantine and Dante Salvatore don't exist, snap like overextended rubber bands, and I find myself reaching for the phone Dante left with me, the sleek black device that has exactly 1 number programmed into it, and my hands are steadier than they should be when I press the call button and wait through 2 rings before that velvet-wrapped death voice answers with a single word that sounds like both a question and a command. "Arya," he says, my name in his mouth doing strange things to my nervous system that I absolutely refuse to analyze right now. And I can hear something in the background that sounds like men speaking in rapid Italian. The clink of glasses. The ambient noise of power being wielded in expensive restaurants, where the elite gather to pretend they're civilized while they plot each other's destruction. "I'm in," I tell him, surprised by how strong my voice sounds, how certain, how much like a woman who knows exactly what she's doing even though I feel like I'm throwing myself off a cliff and hoping someone catches me before I hit the rocks below. They came to my apartment, left me a note that makes it very clear that running isn't an option, and I'd rather go down fighting alongside someone who has the resources to actually hurt them than spend whatever time I have left, cowering in fear waiting for them to find me again. There's a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of silence that stretches just long enough for me to wonder if I've somehow said the wrong thing, made the wrong choice, revealed too much of the rage and fear and desperate need for retribution that's burning in my chest like swallowed gasoline waiting for a match. "Marco will bring you to me," Dante finally says, and there's satisfaction in his voice that sends shivers racing down my spine for reasons that have nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the way he sounds like a man who just acquired exactly what he wanted. "We have a lot to discuss, and not much time to transform you from Arya Moretti, the gallery assistant, into someone the Constantines will look at and realize they made a catastrophic mistake when they decided you were disposable. The drive to wherever Marco is taking me, some restaurant in the financial district, where glass towers scrape the sky and money moves in invisible rivers that reshape the world according to the whims of men who've never known what it's like to worry about rent, passes in a blur of city streets and my own spiraling thoughts about what I've just agreed to, what it means to become Dante Salvatore's woman in all the ways that word implies, and whether I'm strong enough or smart enough or ruthless enough to survive in a world where violence is currency and loyalty is the only thing more valuable than power. The restaurant is the kind of place I would never have entered in my previous life. All dark, wood and darker secrets, with waiters who move like shadows, and patrons who speak in hushed tones about things that would make headlines if anyone outside these walls ever heard them. And when Marco guides me through the main dining room toward a private area in the back, I feel every eye in the place tracking my movement, like I'm a fascinating new specimen in their collection of dangerous things. Dante is waiting in a room that's more like a throne room than a private dining space, all leather and mahogany and the kind of understated luxury that screams old money and older power, and he's not alone. There are 3 other men with him, all wearing suits that cost more than my yearly salary, all radiating the kind of controlled violence that suggests they could kill me with their bare hands and not even wrinkle their designer ties in the process. But it's Dante who captures my complete attention the way a black hole captures light. And seeing him again after 24 hours of trying to convince myself that my memory had exaggerated his impact, that no man could actually be that magnetic, that commanding, that devastatingly beautiful in ways that make my heart forget how to beat properly, is like being struck by lightning for the second time, and discovering that the first time wasn't a fluke, that some forces of nature simply refuse to be diminished by familiarity or fear. He stands when I enter, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seems incongruous coming from a man who probably ordered someone's execution this morning over his espresso, and the way his dark eyes sweep over me, cataloging my borrowed clothes, my healing bruises that are now more yellow than purple, the set of my shoulders that I'm trying desperately to keep straight and confident despite feeling like an imposter playing dress-up in a world I don't understand, makes me feel simultaneously exposed and protected in ways I can't begin to untangle. "Gentlemen, this is Arya Moretti," Dante says, his voice carrying the weight of someone introducing a valuable asset rather than a traumatized woman who just agreed to become his fake girlfriend and real spy. "She's going to be instrumental in bringing down the Constantine operation. and from this moment forward she's under my protection, which means anyone who touches her answers to me in ways they won't survive long enough to regret. The three men regard me with varying degrees of skepticism and interest, and I force myself to meet each of their gazes in turn, to show them that I'm not going to be the weak link in whatever plan Dante is constructing, that I understand the stakes and I'm willing to play this game even though the learning curve might kill me. This is Alessandro, my financial advisor, who will be setting up accounts in your name and ensuring that you have access to whatever resources you need. Dante continues, gesturing to a silver-haired man whose eyes are sharp enough to cut glass, and whose expression suggests he's calculating my net worth and finding it severely wanting. This is Vincent, who handles security, and will be coordinating your protection detail, because you're going to be visible in ways that make you a target for anyone wanting to get to me through softer channels. Vincent nods at me with the kind of professional courtesy that makes it clear he's babysat plenty of Dante's acquisitions before, and finds this whole situation routine, which should probably comfort me, but instead makes me wonder how many other women have sat in this chair and agreed to become part of Dante Salvatore's world, and whether any of them survived the experience intact. And this is Father Dominic, who serves as my confessor and occasionally my conscience, though God knows I ignore his advice more often than I follow it. Dante finishes, and the priest, because of course a crime lord has a priest on staff, because the Catholic guilt runs deep even in men who murder for a living, gives me a smile that's surprisingly kind, surprisingly human in a room full of predators. "Welcome, child," Father Dominic says in a voice that sounds like weathered comfort, like he's seen every sin humanity has to offer, and still manages to find compassion somewhere in the wreckage. "I hope you know what you're getting yourself into, though I suspect no one ever really does when they make deals with men like Dante." "I don't," I admit, because lying seems pointless when everyone in this room can probably read me like a children's book, can see every fear and desperate hope written across my face in letters too large to hide. But the alternative is waiting for Victor Constantine to finish what he started, and I'd rather take my chances with a devil I can see than the ones hunting me in the dark. Something flickers across Dante's face at my words. Something that might be respect, or might be satisfaction, or might be the predatory pleasure of a man who's just confirmed that his new acquisition has the spine necessary to survive what's coming. And he dismisses the other men with a subtle gesture that sends them filing out of the room until it's just the two of us, and the weight of everything I've agreed to hanging in the air, like expensive perfume mixed with gunpowder. "Sit," he says, and it's not quite a command, not quite a request, but something in between that makes me choose to obey because I want to rather than because I have to. And I settle into the leather chair across from him, with as much grace as I can manage given that my ribs are still protesting every deep breath, and my body feels like one giant bruise that's slowly healing into something harder, something less breakable. "Tell me everything you know about the Artemis Gallery," Dante begins, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who owns not just this restaurant, but probably half the city block it sits on. "Every transaction you processed, every client who seemed suspicious, every conversation you overheard that made your instincts whisper that something wasn't quite right, because I need to understand the full scope of their operation before I can dismantle it properly." And so I talk, words spilling out of me like a confession, like testimony, like the deposition of someone who spent 6 months being willfully blind to what was happening right in front of her, because acknowledging it would have meant admitting that her boring, safe job was actually a front for money laundering and art fraud on a scale that serves multiple crime families. And Dante listens with the kind of focused attention that makes me feel like every word I say is being recorded, cataloged, weaponized for future use against the people who thought I was too insignificant to matter. I tell him about the clients who paid in cash for paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, about the late-night deliveries that Marcus insisted I leave early to avoid witnessing, about the ledger he kept in a safe behind a fake Rothko that documented every illegal transaction in meticulous detail. And with every piece of information I provide, I watch Dante's expression shift into something darker, something hungrier, something that looks like a predator who's just caught the scent of prey and knows the hunt is about to become very, very satisfying. "The ledger," he says when I finish, leaning forward with an intensity that makes the air between us feel charged with electricity. "Do you know if the Constantines found it when they killed Marcus? Or is there a chance it's still in the gallery? Still hidden? Still waiting for someone smart enough to know where to look?" I consider this, mentally retracing my steps through that horrible night, remembering the chaos of watching Marcus die, the terror of being dragged from my hiding spot, the beating that followed in that dark alley, and I realize with sudden, crystalline clarity that in all the chaos, I never saw anyone open the safe, never saw Victor or his men even approach the wall where it was hidden behind artwork that most people dismissed as a mediocre reproduction. "They didn't find it," I say slowly, certainty growing with each word as I reconstruct the timeline in my mind. "They were looking for something, were tearing the place apart, searching. But Marcus died before he could tell them where he kept the real records, and they grabbed me before I could slip away. Which means the ledger is probably still there, still hidden, still containing every piece of evidence needed to prove that the Constantines have been using the Artemis Gallery to launder money from their drug operations and human trafficking ventures." Dante's smile when I finish speaking is the kind of expression that probably makes his enemies lose sleep, the kind that promises retribution dressed up in legal paperwork and legitimate business dealings that will destroy lives without ever getting his hands dirty. And I realize that I've just given him exactly what he needs to bring down Victor Constantine in a way that won't just kill the man, but will dismantle his entire empire, seize his assets, turn his allies against him, and leave him with nothing but the memory of how it felt to be untouchable before a woman he tried to throw away became his downfall. "We're going to retrieve that ledger," Dante announces, standing with the kind of decisive energy that suggests plans are already forming, strategies being calculated, pieces being moved on a chessboard I can barely see. "But first, we need to transform you from a woman hiding in borrowed clothes into someone the Constantines will see at my side and realize that they've made an enemy they can't afford. That touching you was the single most expensive mistake of their criminal careers." He leads me out of the restaurant and into a car that probably costs more than my parents' house, and the driver takes us through the city toward the kind of shopping district where windows display single items that cost 5 figures, and sales associates look at you like they can smell your tax bracket from across the street. And when we stop in front of a boutique that doesn't even have a name on the door, just a discreet number in brass that suggests if you have to ask, you don't belong here. I feel my stomach drop because I'm about to be transformed into someone I don't recognize, someone who belongs in Dante's world of violence and luxury and power, plays that reshape lives like clay. The next 4 hours pass in a whirlwind of personal shoppers who take my measurements with ruthless efficiency. Designers who drape fabric over my body like I'm a mannequin rather than a person. Makeup artists who study my face with the intensity of scientists, examining a particularly interesting specimen. And through it all, Dante watches with an expression that might be satisfaction, or might be possession, or might be something more complicated that I don't have the emotional bandwidth to decipher right now. When they finally let me see myself in the full-length mirror, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me, because they've taken Aria Moretti, the struggling gallery assistant with her thrift store clothes, and her student loan debt, and her naive belief that the world was fundamentally fair. And they've created someone else entirely, someone wearing a black dress that probably costs more than my car, someone with hair that falls in artful waves that took an hour to achieve but looks effortlessly perfect, someone with makeup that enhances rather than masks, someone who could walk into any room in this city and belong there because expensive clothes are armor, and beauty is a weapon, and looking like you deserve power is halfway to actually having it. "Perfect," Dante says, coming to stand behind me so that our reflections merge in the mirror, his hands settling on my shoulders with a possessiveness that sends heat racing through my body, despite every logical reason why I should not be attracted to a man who kills people for a living, and just bought me like I'm a particularly interesting acquisition for his collection. The Constantine family is hosting a charity auction tomorrow night at the Metropolitan Gallery, One of those events where the city's elite gather to pretend they care about art education, while they really just want to show off their wealth and make connections that will make them richer. And you and I are going to attend as a couple, are going to make an entrance that ensures everyone in that room understands that you're mine, and that anyone who thinks about finishing what Victor started will have to go through me first. My reflection in the mirror looks calm, composed, like a woman who attends charity auctions with crime lords all the time. But inside I'm screaming because tomorrow night I'm going to walk into a room full of people who want me dead. I'm going to stand beside a man whose protection is the only thing keeping me breathing. I'm going to pretend that I belong in a world where art and murder and money all tangle together into something beautiful and terrible and completely beyond my ability to control. What if they try something? I ask, my voice steadier than I feel, and in the mirror I watch Dante's expression shift into something cold and absolutely merciless. Then they die, he says simply, like it's the most natural thing in the world, like violence is just another transaction in the currency of power. But they won't, because Victor Constantine may be arrogant and brutal and convinced of his own invincibility. But he's not stupid enough to make a move against me in public, in front of witnesses, in a place where starting a war would bring down attention from authorities that even his connections can't control. He turns me to face him, his hands framing my face with a gentleness that seems incongruous coming from someone capable of such casual brutality. And when he looks at me, really looks at me, I see something in his eyes that might be admiration, or might be calculation, or might be the first stirrings of something far more dangerous than either of us are prepared to acknowledge. "You're stronger than you think, Aria Moretti," he tells me, his voice dropping into something more intimate, more personal, more like he's sharing a secret rather than making an observation. "Stronger than the Constantines realized when they beat you and left you for dead. Stronger than you probably realize yourself. And by the time we're finished, everyone in this city is going to know your name and understand that underestimating you was the last mistake some very powerful men ever made." And then he does something I don't expect. Something that stops my breath and makes my heart forget its rhythm entirely. He leans down and presses his lips to my forehead in a gesture that's somehow more intimate than a kiss, more possessive than any claim of ownership. And I feel something inside me shift and realign like tectonic plates finding new positions, like the woman I was is dying, and someone fiercer, someone more dangerous, someone capable of surviving in Dante Salvatore's world is being born from the ashes of who I used to be. That night, installed in a guest room in his penthouse that's 3 times the size of my entire apartment and decorated with the kind of casual luxury that suggests this is just one of many properties he owns, I stand at the window and look out at the city spread below me like a game board where I'm about to become a player instead of a piece. And I think about tomorrow night, about walking into that gallery on Dante's arm, about seeing Victor Constantine's face when he realizes I survived and came back stronger, came back protected, came back as something he should have feared from the beginning. Sleep, when it finally comes, is full of dreams that blur the line between nightmare and fantasy, between fear and anticipation, between the woman who was beaten in an alley and the woman who's going to stand beside one of the most dangerous men in the city and dare her enemies to try again. And when I wake just before dawn, I find a box on the table beside my bed containing the most beautiful necklace I've ever seen. Diamonds and sapphires arranged in a pattern that looks like falling stars or maybe tears, like something precious that's been weaponized into a declaration of ownership and protection. The note tucked inside is written in Dante's bold, masculine handwriting, just 4 words that make my pulse race, and my hands tremble as I hold the heavy weight of the necklace against my palm. "Wear this tomorrow night." And underneath, in smaller letters that look like they were added as an afterthought, like a confession he almost didn't make, "You'll be magnificent, and they'll all regret ever thinking you were something they could break." And as I fasten the necklace around my throat and watch the stones catch the early morning light and throw fractured rainbows across my skin, I realize that Dante Salvatore has given me more than protection, more than transformation, more than a chance at revenge. He's given me a reason to believe that I might be capable of surviving in a world that eats people like me for breakfast. And tomorrow night, standing beside him in a room full of enemies, I'm going to prove to everyone, including myself, that the woman they tried to bury wasn't weak or disposable or forgettable, but rather a sleeping dragon they should have killed when they had the chance. Because now she's awake and angry and protected by a man whose love language is violence and whose enemies have a habit of disappearing into rivers or construction foundations, or simply ceasing to exist in any meaningful way. Tomorrow night, Victor Constantine is going to look across a gallery full of priceless art and see me wearing diamonds that cost more than his last drug shipment, standing beside a man who could destroy his empire with a phone call, and he's going to realize, too late, far too late, that leaving me alive was the single biggest tactical error of his criminal career. And by the time dawn breaks on whatever comes after, he and everyone who helped him are going to understand exactly what it means to make an enemy of Dante Salvatore by daring to damage something that belongs to him. The dress Dante chooses for me to wear to the charity auction is the color of fresh blood, a deep, arterial red that clings to my body like a second skin and makes a statement that's impossible to ignore. The kind of statement that says I'm not here to blend into the background or play the role of demure companion, but rather to be seen, to be remembered, to be recognized as something far more dangerous than the broken woman Victor Constantine left bleeding in an alley 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks that feel like 3 years, 3 lifetimes, 3 complete transformations of self. Because the woman who stands in front of the full-length mirror in Dante's penthouse bedroom, adjusting diamond earrings that catch the light and throw it back in sharp, glittering promises, is someone I barely recognize. Someone who has learned to walk in heels that cost more than my former monthly rent. Someone who has spent every waking hour studying the intricate web of relationships and rivalries that make up the criminal underworld of this city. Someone who has discovered that knowledge is power, and observation is a weapon, and that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage you can have in a world where everyone is constantly calculating threats and dismissing anything that appears too feminine, too delicate, too insignificant to warrant serious attention. Dante enters the room without knocking, because this is his domain, and privacy is apparently a concept that doesn't apply to him. And when his eyes land on me in this dress that transforms me from a person into a statement, I watch something shift in his expression, something dark and possessive and hungry in ways that have nothing to do with food and everything to do with the kind of want that burns bridges and starts wars and makes rational men do catastrophically irrational things. "You look like vengeance wrapped in silk," he says, his voice dropping into that register that makes my spine straighten and my pulse quicken, despite every logical reason why I should not be affected by a man who has probably said similar things to dozens of women, who has probably perfected the art of making people feel special while keeping his own emotions locked behind walls, built from violence and calculation, and the kind of self-preservation that comes from growing up in a world where showing weakness is an invitation for destruction. He's wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than a luxury car, all sharp lines and expensive fabric that emphasizes the predatory grace of his movements. And when he crosses the room to stand behind me, his reflection joining mine, in the mirror so we look like some twisted fairy tale couple, Beauty and the Beast. If Beauty had learned to bite back, and the Beast had never been cursed to begin with, but had chosen darkness as his natural habitat, I feel the heat of him radiating through the minimal space between our bodies like a promise of things I shouldn't want, but desperately do. His hands settle on my bare shoulders, fingers tracing the line of my collarbone with a gentleness that seems impossible from someone whose hands have definitely ended lives. And when he fastens the sapphire and diamond necklace around my throat, the one he left for me with that note that I've read approximately 400 times trying to decode the subtext. The weight of it feels like a collar, like a claim, like a declaration to everyone at the auction that I belong to Dante Salvatore in ways that supersede logic or safety or any reasonable approach to self-preservation. "Are you ready for this?" he asks, meeting my eyes in the mirror, and I can see the genuine question beneath the casual tone, the acknowledgement that what we're about to do, walking into a room full of people who either want me dead, or want to use me, or want to figure out exactly what kind of threat I represent, is dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with physical violence, and everything to do with the kind of psychological warfare that happens in spaces where the elite gather to pretend they're civilized, while they sharpen their knives and plan each other's downfall. No, I answer honestly, because lying to Dante seems pointless when he can probably read me better than I can read myself. When he spent the last 3 weeks studying me with the same intensity he probably applies to enemy territories he's planning to conquer. But I'm going anyway, because the alternative is letting Victor Constantine think he won, letting him believe that I'm still the terrified woman he beat and discarded. And I'd rather walk into that gallery and look him in the eye and show him exactly how badly he miscalculated than spend one more day being afraid of men who think violence makes them powerful. Something flickers across Dante's face, approval or respect, or perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit. Someone else who has learned that fear is just another emotion to be weaponized, to be controlled, to be transformed into fuel for the kind of cold rage that achieves objectives rather than just making noise. And he turns me to face him with hands that are somehow both gentle and inexorable, giving me the illusion of choice while making it clear that he's going to touch me, going to claim this moment, going to seal whatever bargain we've made with something more binding than words. When we walk through those doors, every eye in the room is going to be on us, he tells me, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, of someone who has orchestrated these kinds of power plays so many times that they've become second nature. Victor will be there with his inner circle, probably his sister Katerina, who handles their art acquisitions and their money laundering through gallery sales. Definitely some of the other families who are trying to figure out which side to choose now that it's becoming clear that the Constantines and the Salvatores are heading toward open war, and all of them are going to be calculating what your presence at my side means, whether you're a genuine relationship or a strategic play, whether you're a weakness they can exploit or a weapon I'm deploying against them. He pauses, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, with a tenderness that makes my breath catch. Makes me forget for a moment that this is all supposed to be an arrangement, a mutually beneficial business transaction dressed up in evening wear and expensive jewelry. And when he continues speaking, his voice has dropped into something more intimate, more personal, more dangerous than anything we've acknowledged before. Let them wonder, he says, and there's something in his dark eyes that looks almost vulnerable, almost real. Almost like he's not entirely sure himself where the performance ends and genuine feeling begins. Let them see me touch you and question whether I'm really capable of keeping this purely strategic. Because the moment they think you might actually matter to me beyond your usefulness as an informant, the moment they believe that hurting you would hurt me, that's when you become truly untouchable, because no one in this city is stupid enough to target someone I actually care about unless they're ready for total war. The implications of what he's saying hit me like a physical force, because he's essentially telling me that the best protection I can have is for our enemies to believe that this arrangement has evolved into something real. Something that would make Dante Salvatore, a man famous for his cold calculation and his ability to make decisions based purely on strategic advantage rather than emotional attachment, vulnerable in ways that could be exploited. And the twisted logic of it makes perfect sense in the upside-down world I now inhabit, where appearing to have a weakness actually makes you stronger because no one wants to be responsible for waking the dragon that comes with genuine emotional investment. So we make them believe, I say, understanding crystallizing into determination, into a role I can play because I've spent my entire life studying human behavior through art, through the way people interact with beauty and status and the symbols of wealth and power. And if I can make wealthy collectors believe that a mediocre reproduction is worth their investment, surely I can make a room full of criminals believe that I've captured the heart of a man who supposedly doesn't have one. We make them believe, Dante confirms, and then he's kissing me. Not the gentle, testing kiss of someone unsure of their reception, but the consuming, possessive kiss of someone claiming ownership, someone marking territory, someone making a statement that has nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with want that's been building between us for 3 weeks of stolen glances, and careful distance and the kind of tension that accumulates until it either dissipates or explodes into something that changes everything. I kiss him back with equal intensity. With 3 weeks of fear and rage and desperate need for something solid to hold on to in a world that's spinning too fast for me to process. And when we finally break apart, both breathing hard, both looking at each other with a mixture of surprise and inevitability, I realize that somewhere in the performance we're about to give, somewhere in the careful choreography of appearing to be falling for each other, we've actually crossed a line that neither of us intended to cross, and now we're in territory far more dangerous than any criminal alliance or strategic partnership. The drive to the Metropolitan Gallery passes in a blur of city lights, and Dante's hand resting possessively on my thigh in a way that makes concentration impossible, makes thinking about strategy impossible, makes everything impossible except the awareness of his touch, and the way my body responds like it's been waiting for exactly this kind of claiming, exactly this kind of possession, exactly this kind of dangerous connection that could destroy us both if we're not careful. The gallery is lit up like a cathedral to wealth and taste, all soaring ceilings and carefully curated exhibitions that cost more to ensure than most people make in a lifetime. And when we step out of the car into a small crowd of photographers who apparently document these kinds of events for society pages and gossip columns, the flash of cameras is blinding, disorienting, transforming us from private people into public performance. And I feel Dante's arm slide around my waist with a possessiveness that reads as genuine even though I know it's calculated, even though I understand that every gesture he makes tonight is designed to send specific messages to specific people. "Smile like you own the world," he murmurs against my ear, his breath warm and distracting. And I do, channeling every ounce of the woman I've been becoming over the past 3 weeks, the woman who survived a beating that should have killed her, the woman who made a deal with the devil and learned to dance in his world, the woman who looks at powerful men and refuses to be diminished by their violence or their money, or their absolute certainty that they can break whatever they want without consequences. The moment we enter the main gallery space, I feel the shift in atmosphere like a physical thing, like the air itself has changed composition to accommodate the weight of all the attention suddenly focused on us, and I watch as conversations stop mid-sentence, as glasses pause halfway to lips, as every person in this room full of criminals and corrupt politicians and wealthy socialites who profit from the suffering of others turns to assess this new development, this unexpected variable in whatever calculations they've been making about the balance of power in the city's underworld. Victor Constantine is standing near the bar with a woman who must be his sister, Katerina. They share the same ice-blue eyes and sharp cheekbones and expression of cold entitlement. And when his gaze lands on me, I watch recognition dawn, followed by shock, followed by something that looks like rage mixed with fear. And I feel a savage satisfaction bloom in my chest because he thought I was dead, or disappeared, or too terrified to ever show my face again. And instead I'm here wearing a dress that costs more than his car and diamonds that announce I'm under the protection of his most dangerous enemy. Dante guides me through the crowd, with a hand at the small of my back, stopping to exchange pleasantries with people whose names I've studied, but whose faces I'm seeing for the first time. The police commissioner who's on at least 3 different crime families' payrolls, the judge who's famous for dismissing cases when the right amount of money changes hands, the socialite philanthropist who runs a charity that's actually a front for an adoption ring that traffics children to wealthy pedophiles. And with each introduction, with each moment of standing beside Dante while he navigates these treacherous social waters with the ease of someone who's been playing this game his entire life, I feel myself transforming further into the role we're creating, into the woman who could genuinely matter to someone like Dante Salvatore. We're examining a Caravaggio that's supposedly being auctioned for charity, but is actually a way for various criminal enterprises to move money through legitimate-looking art transactions when I feel someone approach from behind, feel the particular quality of attention that suggests danger. And when I turn, Victor Constantine is standing there with his sister, both of them studying me like I'm a particularly interesting puzzle they're trying to solve. Like they can't quite reconcile the broken woman they left for dead with the polished, protected woman standing before them now. "Dante," Victor says, his voice carrying that particular tone of false cordiality that men like him use when they're trying to maintain a veneer of civilization while they plot murder. And his eyes slide to me with an assessment that makes my skin crawl, despite the fact that I'm standing beside the most dangerous man in the city. "I see you've acquired a new companion. How unexpected, given your reputation for preferring solitude to the complications that come with emotional attachments." "Arya is full of surprises," Dante responds, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly at my waist in a way that could be possessive or could be a warning to stay calm, to play my part, to not reveal the rage and fear that's churning in my stomach at being this close to the man who beat me. "She has excellent taste in art, and even better instincts for recognizing value that others overlook. Traits I find infinitely more interesting than whatever complications you're imagining." Katerina's sharp eyes are fixed on me with the kind of focused intelligence that suggests she's the real brains behind the Constantine operation. That Victor might be the face and the muscle, but she's the one who actually runs the business. And when she speaks, her voice is cultured, educated, far more dangerous than her brother's obvious brutality. "We met once before, didn't we?" Katerina says, and there's something in her tone that suggests she knows exactly who I am, knows exactly what happened, is perhaps even the one who ordered the beating in the first place because she recognized that I was paying too much attention to transactions at the Artemis Gallery. "At Marcus Stone's gallery, before that unfortunate incident, you were his assistant, if I remember correctly, always hovering in the background taking notes and processing sales, and now here you are, transformed so completely that one might almost not recognize you." The threat in her words is subtle but unmistakable. The implication that she knows exactly what I witnessed, exactly what I know, exactly how much danger I represent to their operations. And I feel my pulse spike with fear that I have to actively suppress because showing weakness now would be catastrophic, would undermine everything Dante and I are trying to establish, would mark me as a target that even his protection might not be able to shield. "Marcus was a good teacher," I respond, keeping my voice steady, channeling every ounce of the confidence I've been building over 3 weeks of studying how to survive in this world. "He taught me to pay attention to details that others miss, to see patterns in transactions that reveal underlying truths, to understand that art is never just about beauty, but about value and power, and the stories people tell themselves about why they deserve to possess beautiful things. Lessons that have proven far more valuable than I initially realized." The look that passes between Victor and Katerina is pure calculation, pure threat assessment, pure recognition that I'm not the disposable witness they thought they'd eliminated, but rather someone who has somehow aligned herself with their most dangerous enemy and might have access to information that could destroy them. And I watch Dante's expression shift into something cold and absolutely merciless as he steps slightly in front of me in a gesture that's both protective and possessive. "If you'll excuse us," Dante says with a tone that makes it clear this isn't a request. "Arya and I have several pieces we want to examine before the auction begins, and I'm sure you both have your own interests to pursue. Though I'd recommend being very careful about which pieces you choose to bid on tonight, because I've made it my personal mission to ensure that certain operations can no longer use art transactions to launder their blood money, and anyone who insists on continuing those practices is going to find themselves facing consequences that extend far beyond financial loss." It's a declaration of war wrapped in polite society language, a threat delivered with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and as Dante guides me away from the Constantines toward another section of the gallery, I can feel Victor's gaze boring into my back like a physical weight, like a promise of violence deferred but not forgotten. And I know with absolute certainty that leaving the auction alive tonight is not guaranteed, that we've just escalated a conflict that was already dangerous into something that could explode at any moment. "That went well," I managed to say with a humor I don't feel, and Dante's hand at my back slides up to my shoulder, pulling me closer against his side in a gesture that could be comfort, or could be strategy, or could be both. "You did perfectly," he tells me, And there's genuine pride in his voice that makes something warm unfurl in my chest, despite the fear and adrenaline coursing through my system. You stood your ground, matched her intelligence with your own, made it clear that you're not some helpless victim they can dismiss, and now they're going to spend the rest of the night trying to figure out exactly how much you know, and exactly how much of a threat you represent. Which means they're not focused on whatever else I have planned. Before I can ask what else he has planned, before I can process the implications of being used as a distraction for some larger strategy, a new voice interrupts our conversation. A woman's voice, low and smoky and carrying the kind of confidence that comes from years of being desired and feared in equal measure. Dante, darling, I heard rumors you'd found yourself a new plaything, but I had to see for myself whether the reports were exaggerated, the woman says. And when I turn, I'm confronted with possibly the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in person. All dark hair and darker eyes and curves poured into a dress that probably violated several decency laws, moving with the kind of predatory grace that suggests violence wrapped in feminine packaging. Isabella, Dante says, and something in his tone makes my stomach clench with a jealousy I have absolutely no right to feel, especially when the woman, Isabella, slides up to him with a familiarity that speaks of intimate history, of bodies that know each other, of a connection that predates whatever arrangement he and I have cobbled together. I thought you were in Milan handling the Rossi situation. The Rossi situation handled itself when Luca decided that embezzling from the family accounts was worth risking his life. Isabella responds with a shrug that suggests murder is just another business transaction. And then her attention shifts to me, with an assessment that makes Victor's earlier scrutiny look friendly by comparison. So this is the girl who has the entire underworld buzzing. The gallery assistant who survived the Constantines and somehow convinced the notoriously commitment-phobic Dante Salvatore to claim her publicly. And I have to admit, I'm impressed, because I spent 5 years trying to get him to acknowledge me as anything more than a convenient arrangement. And here you are after 3 weeks wearing his diamonds and his protection like you were born to it. The jealousy that was a dull ache in my chest sharpens into something more painful, more acute, because Isabella is everything I'm not. Confident, experienced, comfortable in this world of violence and luxury. And the history between her and Dante is written in the way she touches his arm with casual possession, in the way she looks at him with knowledge that goes beyond surface attraction, in the way she makes me feel like an interloper in a relationship that might not be current, but is definitely not finished. Isabella is one of our best operatives, Dante explains, his voice carefully neutral in a way that makes me certain there's emotion he's suppressing. She handles situations that require a particular combination of charm and lethality, and she's also someone who understands that business and pleasure are best kept separate, which is why our arrangement ended years ago on terms that allowed us to maintain a productive working relationship. Of course, Isabella says with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes, and when she looks at me again, there's something in her expression that might be warning, or might be pity, or might be the recognition of someone who sees exactly how this story ends. Just remember, sweetheart, that men like Dante don't actually fall in love. They acquire assets. They make strategic alliances. They attach themselves to people who serve purposes. And the moment you stop being useful, or the moment maintaining your protection becomes more costly than beneficial, you'll find yourself alone faster than you can process what happened. Because in this world, sentiment is a luxury that gets people killed. She walks away before I can formulate a response, her words hanging in the air like poison, like truth, like a prophecy that I desperately want to dismiss but can't quite manage to, because there's a part of me, the rational part that hasn't been completely seduced by Dante's protection and his kisses and the way he makes me feel like I matter, that knows she's right, that knows this arrangement has an expiration date, that knows I'm playing a game where the stakes are my life and my heart and possibly my soul, and losing means more than just death.